And the moderator of the second panel is Mr. Paul Shinkman. And Paul, thanks for joining us today. Paul is the National Security Senior Writer for U.S. News and World Report. And he has embedded with American and foreign military forces in Afghanistan, in the Ukraine, and reported from Iraq and Guantanamo Bay, as well as Southeast Asia and along the Russian border. He will be introducing the second panel, which will focus on new technologies and new strategies in countering landmines and IEDs. Paul, I know we'll have a minute or two just to get the miking right, and then we'll start. And thanks, Paul, for doing this. Thank you, sir.
Getting organized over here, let me briefly introduce the panel and the things we're going to be talking about today. I'm very grateful to be here, very grateful for that panel earlier to really get a sense of identifying the problem that we're talking about today. So as Paul said, I'm Paul Shinkman, National Security Correspondent at U.S. News, and this issue has always been something that has really stayed with me and appeared in some of the reporting that I've done in ways that really profoundly affected me. My first tour in Afghanistan, I embedded with the U.S. forces who were in charge of being the first responders to IED attacks. And it really struck me how concerned they were about the extent to which the enemies that they were facing were able to adapt to the Americans' procedures, both in the kinds of technology that they were using and developing very quickly, but also in the strategies that they were using to employ them. That was not too long before I embedded with forces in Ukraine, in their conflict zone, where I witnessed up close a sort of a return to old-style trench warfare, and they're having to deal with minefields that they themselves had set and minefields that they were up against. And it was interesting watching sort of this technology come full circle. So now that we've had a good understanding this morning about the problems that exist, we're going to talk a little bit about what we do next, what kinds of technologies exist now, what sort of strategies we're looking at to combat these weapons going into the future. And I'm very pleased to be joined by an esteemed panel here. I'm going to briefly introduce them and then invite them if they'd like to come up and make some remarks. Then we're going to have a brief discussion, and then we'd very much like to hear from your questions. So starting first with Sean Burke. Sean is the Program Manager for Humanitarian Demining Research and Development Program with the U.S. Department of Defense. This office develops, tests, and demonstrates new technologies for worldwide demining operations and is executed by the U.S. Army Night Vision and Electronic Sensors Directorate for the DASD for Stability and Humanitarian Affairs. Mr. Steve Priestley is Janus's Global Operations Director for Mine Action, responsible for the development and growth of humanitarian and commercial mine action activities globally, and has worked with the company since 2011. He has previously served as a troop commander in an EOD squadron with the British Army, and in his subsequent 25 years of experience after the military has worked in the design, management, implementation, and oversight of demining. Mr. Massoud Hassani grew up on the edge of Kabul, living next to an active minefield, and he invented the Mine Kafon. Am I pronouncing that right? Mine Kafon, a wind-powered art piece and landmine clearing device that was realized in 2011. And then lastly, but certainly not least, Kenneth Rutherford is the Director of the Center for International Stabilization and Recovery and Political Science and Professor of Political Science at James Madison University. He has an extensive history as a scholar and volunteer and humanitarian aid worker overseas, including in Kenya and Somalia, where he himself was injured by a landmine. He's become an advocate for people with disabilities affected by landmines and has subsequently been named one of the most influential people in the world in armed violence reduction. So with that, should we start? Steve, would you care to come up and share a few words?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk mainly about some of the strategies that we adopted in Ramadi, where Janus was one of the first agencies to go in there. For a short while, I had the pleasure of being called the international community's expert on the ground, which was a little bit daunting. And how we modified some approaches that are general business approaches in terms of risk management, quality management, to really focus our effort. But before that, as technology is a part of the panel, I'd just like to say, as someone who's been a deminer, a demining operations manager, we all welcome anything that's going to improve efficiency, going to improve effectiveness, or going to improve safety. And if you look back at 2008, 1998, Ken's organisation produced a journal of mine action, like a trade journal. There's a theme in terms of the technologies or the areas people are looking at trying to get better. The main one is in detection. How do we find devices? How do we identify them? How do we tell the difference between a mine or an IED and a bit of scrap metal? Another theme seems to be protection, equipment for people who are doing the clearance. And then there's a lot around data management, how we prioritise where we're going to work, how we measure the impact and the outcomes of what we do. And although those key themes are fairly constant, that doesn't mean that development is standing still, people aren't adopting new technologies. It's an evolving threat. And last week when I was asked to take part in a podcast, mines, or now mines and IEDs, are like a little mini arms race in effect. If someone develops a technology or a process that will defeat a mine, manufacturers, or now people working for terrorist organisations, will modify their procedures to make that countermeasure less effective. So it's continually evolving. If you think about it, mines used to be metal. People use metal detectors. What happens? We start making them out of plastic. I'm frequently asked, why don't we use those machines like they had at D-Day that can push a roller, get rid of the mines? Well, mines and devices have evolved, so techniques like that aren't completely effective all the time. So technology is important to us, but one of the things that we looked at and we had to adopt in Ramadi was a really clear understanding of what we were trying to achieve. I've taken part in emergency responses in many places in the Middle East, and I think it's fair to say that the populations in the Middle East are very mobile. They have good road networks, they have access to vehicles. If you look at the war in Lebanon in 2006, 1.25 million people returned home to the south in 72 hours. So from our point of view, being asked to provide part of an emergency response, we knew that we would be under-resourced. We knew that we would be very time pressurized, and we knew that we'd have the added pressure, unfortunately, of people, families, dying, being killed where they try to go home spontaneously. I think General Wolf mentioned earlier that actually for a time Ramadi was locked down and the government stopped spontaneous return because of the number of accidents. So in terms of risk management, when I worked for a previous NGO, the one that Jane manages now, we started hearing about risk management. Donors were encouraging us to take risk-based approaches. We thought it was about body armour, measures we take to keep people safe. And while it is partly, a big part of it is understanding your strategic objective, how you get there. As an implementing agency working for either US donors, UK, it's how we enable the people that we are supporting to achieve their strategic objectives. And the reason I'm bringing this up is earlier people spoke about how do you measure impact. The number of mines you clear is definitely an important factor. The amount of square meters that you clear is definitely an important factor. But particularly in an emergency response, it's not necessarily an indication that you're doing what you need to be doing at that time. So in a previous life, as you mentioned, I'd spent some time in Germany, and at that stage we were focused on, if World War III happened, we imagined that NATO runways would be bombed, they'd have holes put in them, and then scatterable mines would be dropped to stop people repairing the holes, to shut down the runway. Interestingly enough, until the Ottawa Convention, they started calling scatterable mines submunitions. So basically, make holes in the runway, make it difficult to repair. So we looked at expedient methods of getting the minimum operating surface necessary to get a plane off the ground, to get it refueled, rearmed. Do we shoot these submunitions? Do we hose them? Do we bulldoze them? We looked at lots of options that in themselves weren't perfect, but our strategic objective wasn't necessarily disposing of all these munitions. It was getting planes in the air. So how does that relate to Ramadi or humanitarian work? I worked in southern Angola at the end of the 90s. There was a drought. We were on the southern tip of the Kalahari Desert. Water wells had been mined as part of the war and blown up, and an organisation wanted to repair them. So we teamed with them to enable them access, and generally the people who work in mine action, men and women, are very highly motivated. They like to make a difference. They like to be clearing landmines or IEDs. And we'd have some wells where we wouldn't find anything. Maybe cattle or a person had stepped on the mine, maybe there were none laid there. And we get some people coming back, sorry Steve, we didn't find anything. Well actually, it didn't matter, because at that time our objective was to enable the well to be renovated, and if we didn't find anything, it wasn't the major issue. So fast forward to Ramadi, early 2016, and I think we've already mentioned that there was a lot of discussion in terms of what were the priorities for the international community with their assistance. Would it be infrastructure or would it be housing? Originally we looked at clearance of housing, but then there was discussion not just with us at a level, I think again General Wolf mentioned the Fund for Stabilisation. All interested stakeholders fed into prioritisation, and it was decided that we would focus on infrastructure, or our organisation would, because it was felt that if you moved people home, but they didn't have power, they didn't have water, they didn't have access to healthcare, then that was not an ideal situation either. So the phrase blended approach was mentioned, and I think having been involved with several immediate post-conflict responses, the good news is that the response in Iraq, which Lisa Grande was a big part of managing, but so were donors, embassies, coalition partners, and the Iraqi government, was pretty well organised. Because my major concern was always, all right, we're here, we're mobilising, we're going to start work, where do we work? And actually we had a list of priority targets in Ramadi, schools, water treatment plants, health posts, and that was to be our focus. So in terms of how we took a risk-based approach to clearance of these sites, our objective wasn't necessarily to clear an entire water treatment plant. Some of these facilities are massive. Several acres would take a long time and probably tie down all the resources that we had. So based on what I'd done previously in Angola, what we'd done in Germany. The strategy we took was what's the minimum area that we need to clear. Prior to getting on the ground, we'd look at where are switch rooms, where's key bits of this water treatment plant or sewage plant. Let's get access to them. Let's do an assessment. Let's evaluate how much the area needs to be cleared to enable a repair. And then let's fence off the rest of it and come back later. Or, as we said, there's many organisations involved in the effort in Iraq and in Syria, where we were trying to move as quickly as we could into areas when they were semi-permissive. Let's get it where it can be repaired, fence the rest of it, inform the people who work there, and leave it. So the main sort of takeaway or point that I want to make is organisations trying to respond are always going to be massively pressurised, and you do have to make decisions, some of which are not perfect. You do need to coordinate, and as I said, I think the response in Iraq was probably the best I'd seen so far. Probably similar things are happening in Yemen, I would imagine, with Lisa there now. And probably where we do embrace new technologies, I think approach of really understanding how you fit in to the bigger stabilisation effort or humanitarian effort is probably a key differentiator as to whether you're going to achieve impact or not. That was it. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Steve. Now we're going to hear from Sean Burke, the Program Manager for the Humanitarian Demining Research and Development Program.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation, and particularly being part of the technology panel. I have a video that will have a still photograph that will come up for about a minute, and I'm going to use my prepared text as it goes along well with the video. Again, I'm Sean Burke. I'm the Program Manager for the U.S. Humanitarian Demining Program, and during the next 3 to 5 minutes, I will be discussing our program and its goals and objectives. The U.S. Humanitarian Demining Program supports global humanitarian mine action and is focused on research and development. My program, which receives between $10 and $15 million annually, is funded by the U.S. Department of Defense, Stability and Humanitarian Affairs Office, or SHA, which falls under the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. Our Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Mr. Mark Swain, is here in the audience today, and he'll be speaking to you later today. The purpose of our program is to design, develop, and demonstrate new technologies for use in worldwide demining operations. Although our primary responsibility is to support our Global Combatant Command's humanitarian mine action programs, we also support the priorities of various partner organizations, such as several NGOs, many of which are here today, the Halo Trust, the Mines Advisory Group, Norwegian People's Aid, various mine action centers around the world, such as Cambodia Mine Action Center and Thailand Mine Action Center, and other foreign military units that are assigned demining responsibilities in their respective countries. To date, my program has contributed almost $200 million and has been providing new technology for nearly 25 years. This technology is directly responsible for the clearance of over 195,000 mines in UXO from over 53 million square meters of land. And that has been accomplished in 40 different countries. We currently, today, have 76 technologies helping clear landmines and unexploded ordnance in 16 countries around the world. These include landmine and UXO detection technologies, vegetation and mechanical clearance technologies, landmine and UXO neutralization technologies, and various other HMA-related survey and support technologies. Our developments follow a multi-step process that begins with the understanding of the specific needs and capabilities of our partner demining organizations. We obtain this knowledge through continuous communication in the form of face-to-face meetings or engagements, in-country site assessments, and feedback on the performance of the deployed technologies you see. All of this helps us define the technology gaps that exist and the priorities in which we aim to fulfill those gaps. With an understanding of the types of new technology assistance that is required, we then develop technologies to meet these needs. Continuing through the development cycle, every new technology undergoes rigorous technical testing by our team of engineers before it is deployed overseas to our partner organizations. Once these systems are deployed, they play an active role in what we call operational field evaluation, or an OFE, and these are conducted in live minefields and UXO contaminated areas. Our partner organizations perform these operational field evaluations by using these technologies in their day-to-day operations. The feedback that we get is an important part of the information we require as we consider and we make our future investment decisions in the following years. I wanted to take a second or two and at least talk about what we're doing in the Middle East. Our program currently has 24 deployed technologies in the Middle Eastern regions as defined on the Middle East Institute website. We are supporting 10 mechanical clearance technologies and 1 multi-sensor detection system in Iraq with the Mines Advisory Group, 4 mechanical clearance technologies in Lebanon with the Mines Advisory Group. Additionally, we have provided 8 mechanical clearance technologies and 2 different multi-sensor detection systems with the Halo Trust in Afghanistan. In Iraq, sifting and crushing and clearance technologies we provided to MAG have helped clear almost 2,500 mines and 276 UXO and clear over 425,000 square meters of land. Provided to MAG have helped clear almost 400 mines and almost 5,000 UXO from over 325,000 square meters of land. And finally, in Afghanistan, the systems we have provided, Halo, have helped us clear 22,000 mines and 1,000 UXO from over 17 million square meters of land. Although the global process continues, global progress continues to be made, challenging new threats are emerging, especially in the Middle East. And the HD R&D program intends to continue the development of new technologies to help bring the eradication of the mine and UXO threat to civilian populations around the world. And with that, I thank you. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Sean. With that, I'll turn it over to Kenneth Rutherford with James Madison University's Center for International Stabilization and Recovery. Hi, Kenneth.
Thank you, Paul. So I'd like to first give a big shout out to a lot of folks in the room who are actually doing the hard work of clearing the mines, and that's good friends at Mines Advisory Group, Steve, that's where we first met, now with Janus, Halo Trust, Marshall Legacy Institute. There's some great heroes in the room, and also CHEA doing the work they're doing, and just 3 of my colleagues. Raise your hands right here, because what I'm going to say is I'm sure some of you might want to follow up with the information. They're the smart people in terms of my organization here. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about the Journal of Humanitarian Affairs, the Journal of Conventional Weapons Destruction, which really highlights, I have my slide here, which highlights other people's research, and it showcases what the journal does well. And that is, it's an information center that bridges the various communities in the conventional weapons destruction field, which some of the innovation and new technologies highlighted here, I'm going to highlight 6, are from those in the clearance lanes around the world, including the Middle East, and others who have uber technological and strategic talent. And when the journal bridges these communications in terms of what's showing, what's lacking, where's the information gap, and these following 6 examples are good examples of what could be applied in the Middle East or is being applied in the Middle East. Next. So this is pretty special for me. my right leg, I lost it in the Middle East, according to the definition of the Middle East Institute in Somalia. And my left leg was amputated from the same accident in this country, in this city, and in this neighborhood. So I've come full circle in terms of addressing landmines and explosives and IEDs in the Middle East, so it's an honor to be here. As you heard from the previous speaker, there are a lot of reasons why we're discussing the Middle East, but what I want to focus on is that because of this devastation caused by IEDs, landmines, and explosives, innovation is applied. So first, this is from Pierre Lodhammer from UNMAS, who talks about he talks about that the impact of mine action should look at the socio-economic impact. I think it's something that Steve said and some of the previous speakers had mentioned. What is the impact of mine action instead of the numbers of explosives ordnance cleared? And he talks about mines on bridges and how there may be 2 or 3 on the bridge, and what is the measurable impact of clearing that compared to mines in maybe rural areas, such as a village under ideal conditions. We also heard about prioritizing, so I won't go into that, but that's in a journal. Next. Oh, sorry. Guy Rhodes of the Geneva Center for Humanitarian Demining, very well-known individual. In this article, he discusses the historical perspective of IED operations as performed by mine action actors, and discusses the ability of the international mine action standards to improvise and improve guidance for IED clearance operations in the humanitarian context. Now, what constitutes a humanitarian situation versus a military situation? For example, mine action operators clearing IEDs should consider the following. Is the aim of the task humanitarian as opposed to military or security? Is the mission conducive for safe and secure operations? And third, is the humanitarian access possible? And is the device, quote, out of play, unquote, or cold, quote, cold or unquote? He discusses a lot more about the evolution that you heard from the opening speaker about landmine and IEDs. The third innovation is Robert Keeley, who's very well known in the field, and he discusses the importance of the humanitarian sector, which is the circle on the left, and the CIED circle, which is the circle on the right. Again, I won't go into the details. I promised Paul I wouldn't go into the details, but you can see my staff or myself afterwards if you have any questions. But the overlap in the circle is where the humanitarian mine action actors are clearing IEDs. If you go to the right, it's counter IED. If you go to the left, it's humanitarian mine action. And he argues that not to rehash the existing technical military-oriented counter IED procedures in the humanitarian sector, but we must address the problems caused by the introduction of civilian and business models, and to be aware of the relationship to the humanitarian sphere, and that there is a difference between CIED and humanitarian IED, as the latter does not attack the network. Fourth, a very interesting innovation by Dr. Don Pratt of Messiah College and Nicholas Torbolt of the Halo Trust. In many cases, low-cost and ideally sourced components would be the best way to neutralize explosives in particular situations. These are not bound by carry-on baggage or dual-use technology restrictions. The destruction in situ is ideal for using an explosive charge to defuse or neutralize a mine or explosives. However, some clearance groups are faced with restrictions on explosives or importation of other energetic materials. Sometimes the legitimate military use of these weapons does not abide by the humanitarian use, or legislation in some countries has been unable to address the military use of explosives or any use of explosive devices in the EOD toolbox. In other words, destroying landmines and other thin-cased ordnance by burning through the case, this is what the article argues, can defragilate the explosive. It could neutralize the explosive within the charge itself, and it's consumed without detonation. 7 of the 8 experts who read this article agreed that the technology is useful in the field. The 5th innovation and technology is the Blackadder disruptors from Andy Smith, also widely known in the humanitarian mine action field with decades of experience, and Bill Bagley from Johns Hopkins University. This is a tool that can be used to disrupt and discharge the explosive in situ. It is part of a broader effort that is intended to provide explosive ordnance disposal operators with reliable, open source information to assist and develop munitions disruption. And it provides operators with the information necessary to make energetic tools not only reduce the cost of clearance, but also avoid or circumvent restrictions that often complicate EOD operations. Fifth, before I get into the fifth, I just wanted to show in the upper right-hand corner the photograph. Those are German World War II POWs who were forced to clear mines in Denmark, which was historically the way to clear underground or subsurface explosives. It occurred in the American Civil War as well, where Confederate prisoners of war were forced to clear explosives. Of course, since 1949, since the Geneva Conventions of 1949, that is illegal under international humanitarian law. To the slide, written by Black Tusk Geophysics, this is a very interesting technology in terms of advancing geophysical classification of World War II era explosives. In summary, in a couple seconds here, this is technology that was used in Germany to clear unexploded bombs that were below metal detector range. There's a lot of aerial delivered explosives in World War II in Germany, and the same has occurred in Syria and Iraq. And what AGC does, it combines geophysical sensors designed for detection and characterization of metal targets with physical models of digital data to extract intensive fingerprint data for each target, and the reliable identification of the explosive and the rejection of metal clutter that would otherwise be excavated using conventional clearance methods. The map shows the situation of landmines, IEDs, and other explosive remnants of war around the world. And I'd like to thank you for being here to discuss innovation technology in the Middle East. Hopefully the Middle East tenure as an experiment in this space won't last long, and that these conversations today will bring new strategies and technologies to the region. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kenneth. Now I'm going to turn it over to Massoud Hassani, the inventor of the Mine Kafon and the founder of Mine Kafon Labs. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the Middle East Institute for inviting me here. Today I will show you a video which represents some of my work in the past few years. Originally, I was born in Afghanistan, and in the past 20 years I'm living in the Netherlands. When I was born in Afghanistan, there was the war going on with many countries, as usual. And there were a lot of landmines, so I experienced myself a lot of landmines, and a lot of friends and family members also got injured, and some got killed because of these explosives. And so this inspired me a lot during my childhood. And my background is arts, but also technology. And in 2011, I have graduated from an art school with an artistic approach, how to clear landmines with a DIY product. And this video was viewed by millions, and I've been doing presentations in the past few years only to raise awareness. I'm not an expert in demining, but only I wanted to raise awareness on experts, among other people. And the project has been published in many school books and also on many TVs and so on. And so currently I'm running also an R&D lab. It's specialized in drone technology and robotics. And in the past 3 years, we are developing drones and also robots which can detect and detonate landmines from a distance. And this is now in the final stage, and we'll be starting using it from January next year. And so I will show you now a video about the past few years. And yeah. This project is crowdfunded by 8,000 people, and currently we are R&D lab, which exists from 20 people, and they're all also coming from all over the world. They're mainly students from technological universities, and they're working for free. And currently we got funding from the Dutch government to develop this products even further. And so, as I said, we are not as experts as most of these people, but we are young people who want to help, and we are here to also hear more stories. And we want to make a platform which is more interactive and which is more global, that we can find the results and find the data much quicker and easier. And so, as a result, it will be helping everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Masood. We would like to get to your questions, so please think of them now. I'm going to start with a couple, and then we'll have our last few minutes dedicated to what you'd like to hear about. But perhaps I can start with Steve and Kenneth. I'd be interested to get your perspective. We talked a little bit about this, but I'd be interested to get your sense of what you see as the greatest, most current obstacles in the way of the work that you're working on now. Do you see new technologies emerging? We heard in the earlier panel about the influence of Iranian technologies showing up in places like Syria and Iraq. Are we looking at new implementations of old technologies in terms of targeting civilians, for example? Is it public awareness? What do you see as, in 2018, what is the biggest obstacle in the way of the work that you're trying to do?
I think in terms of one obstacle, it's the sheer number of devices that are laid prolifically. And some of the challenges we're facing at the moment in Iraq are that where the fighting or a lot of the contamination is in urban areas. So there are particular challenges in initiation methods. We've worked with Chaya and some other people to try and look at ways to detect what are very fine wire pressure switches that, when they're covered in dust in a ruined building, are very hard to see and very hard to find electronically. So technically we've looked at that. But I think the fact that a lot of these city centres where the fighting took place, you have IEDs interlaced with destroyed buildings. Some of the technologies we're looking at are not that innovative. Things like armoured bulldozers. There's literally tens of thousands of tons of cubic tons of rubble that you need to remove that are interlaced with UXO and mines as well. So I think the context, the urban environment is certainly extremely challenging.
Just to follow on with Steve, I would say there are a couple huge challenges. Number one is leadership. I'm looking at an awesome leader in the room right here, His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed of Jordan. Jordan was the first Arab country to ban landmines, and Jordan announced itself as minefield-free a couple years ago. Very strong political leadership. Where's that in the region in terms of landmines? A second challenge would be donor fatigue. In the late 1990s, there's a lot of multilateral support for humanitarian clearance. Ironically, the United States, who did not sign the Ottawa Ban Treaty, is the world's leading donor by far in terms of humanitarian clearance. In fact, it's grown massively over the last couple of years for the Middle East. And I think we heard before on a previous panel that 75% of all the funds in clearance in Syria comes from the United States. So a lot of other donors have dropped off. Now some, maybe like the UK, they've made an announcement, the 2025 campaign. Third would be the gray area where there's not an end stop to war. There's not the Treaty of Versailles anymore or Appomattox in this country. But conflict lingers, and who's going to fill that space? Is it the humanitarian mine action operators who have the neutrality shield? They don't do CIED or intelligence gathering, let's say. Or is it the CID operators or the local police or the military who does that? So there's a space, a very vague space that historically we didn't have before. And I would say that the fourth would be the purposefully targeting of civilians, which was mentioned in the previous panel, where groups are using explosives purposely to target civilians as opposed to part of a tactical operation during a war or battle, which you could conclude would make clearance much more difficult since it's not on the front lines, but it's in front of a refrigerator or in the front door, or as Steve just said, in an urban environment. So maybe those are like 4 of the many challenges out there. Yeah.
And Sean and Masood, I'd be interested to ask you a little bit more about the resources that are available to do the work that you're both doing. We heard earlier about a lack of public awareness as to the need for these kinds of things. This is also a time when the U.S. at least has signaled that it's less interested in paying for other countries' humanitarian relief. So perhaps, Masood, can you sort of start a little bit, what kinds of resources do you have at your disposal? How difficult is it to either raise awareness or just practically be able to fund and proliferate the things that you're working on?
So when I started doing campaigns in 2011, it was very hard to find any information or a lot of actual updated information about landmines because it's not a popular problem. Let's say AIDS is very popular, so all the art is born and all these famous people, they are donating. So it becomes a famous problem, so it means that a lot of doctors and a lot of engineers, they will evolve new technologies because it's interesting also for them. So how is it possible to make this problem also a topic that a lot of engineers want to get involved in it? And then, so that was my view, to make this problem active. It is, we all know it's there, the experts know it, but the general public doesn't know nothing about it. They don't even know landmines exist still. So that was my point of view, to make it appealing for people to get involved. When something becomes interesting, then they start also thinking about it. So I've got emails from kids from 10 years old, how they want to solve this problem. But also professors with PhD degrees that they have the same thoughts. But these are interesting approaches. It's not the best, but this is the beginning. So if we can make it more appealing, so we have created GIFs, we have created also, I heard before, cartoons, and all this kind of promotional materials to just show to the public. And then, so that's why I used crowdfunding, because people get involved and then they stay involved in it. And also crowdsourcing. So it means that we are inviting people from all over the world. They come at our lab, they stay there for a while, and then they try to explore ideas and so on. So that is what I think it's not there. And also a platform that we can find more information about it, which is like an application which shows landmines in every country, where they are, how far we are from them. And because most of this information, it's private, or they're not shared with everyone else. And then also, how can we prevent that there will not be more landmines? Because in the time that we are clearing them, there will be more landmines again. So it's a little bit endless process. So these are my things that I'm working on.
Yeah. Sean, can you talk a bit about how you're prioritizing the resources that you have?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I think obviously we'd all like more money to put toward the problem. That would make things go faster and get rid of the problem sooner. But I think the smart thing you have to do is utilize the money that you do have in the best way possible. Back when I started this program, we didn't have the ability to discriminate mines from clutter. We've developed dual sensor technologies now that MAG, Halo, Norwegian People's Aid, and others are using that can now identify a mine utilizing ground penetrating radar and metal detection on a handheld device. And with a 95% clutter rejection, you can find the mines and eliminate digging up all those pieces of metal fragments that take sometimes up to 20 minutes to dig out of the ground. If you multiply that by millions, that's a lot of time. So developing these types of technologies, we've also in the last couple of years, about 6 years ago, we had our first UXO clearance, UXO-focused workshop that we hosted in Cambodia. And one of the things that we realized we didn't have was, A, nobody was using mechanical systems in the clearance of UXO. We felt we could do that, so we've developed robotic vegetation clearance devices that can go in and clear vegetation. We've developed UXO detection systems that take commercial off-the-shelf detectors like an EM61 system. We put it on a cart, and now we've applied software to it that now can discriminate clutter from UXO, which is very difficult when you consider UXO can be anywhere from the surface to the very deep in the ground. So utilizing the dollars well, focusing on commercial off-the-shelf technology has been a huge gain. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. We have a huge capability in my office we have a 55,000 square foot facility. I've got a team of 25 to 30 engineers / technicians that can build this equipment in-house. So in the past where a gap existed, a need was, a requirement existed, we would build a system such as small vegetation cutters that were remote controlled. The advancement in commercial technology has surpassed that, so now we can take advantage of that, and now by utilizing commercial systems, you can keep the cost down, the supportability up in countries. These countries are able to support, even the third world countries are able to support many of the chassis that we have in country. And that brings the cost way down and the productivity way up. So again, the DoD has been focused for 25 years. I think I haven't been to a conference yet where there's been a larger governmental contribution from a DoD side of almost $200 million, but the way in which it's spent, the intelligence, that's why we have such a close relationship with organizations like Mines Advisory Group, the Halo Trust, Norwegian People's Aid. My guys go to the field, they spend a lot of time in the field, understand the problem, they bring that expertise, that knowledge back and be able to apply it. Many times, I just talked to Mike Navard from Halo Trust, Jim Cohen, you'll hear from him later today. We're developing their budget this year, and they have some ideas. They see commercial systems that they're interested in, and we haven't been able to put our eyes on that. And we'll go look at that. Sometimes we'll buy that equipment, make improvements to it. Adding cameras and armor in certain spots of certain technologies, improving the maneuverability or even roboticizing some of these platforms that aren't that way, go a big way, and we have the expertise to do that. We take forestry equipment or construction equipment and make it into demining systems. The rubble that you mentioned, these houses it's basically rubble with IED devices inside. We sent the Rebel Crusher to Iraq to deal with it so they can dump rubble into this with the IEDs and basically crush everything, because there's nothing, you can't sift through it. There's no detectors that can be used to find these devices in that. So to sum it all up, it's really utilizing the technology in the smartest way to keep the cost down and the supportability up.
Interesting. Thank you. What questions do we have from the audience? Sir, here with your hand up. We're quite limited on time, so I ask if you could please keep your question as short and direct as possible. Thank you.
Natural earthquakes have been known to set off mines at the best price of all, free. And I'm wondering if we've tried seismic exploration, earthquake generation machines like you might get from Schlumberger to recreate that effect, to use seismic energy to explode these devices.
So using seismic energy to help destroy landmines. Anybody have an experience with that or toss that theory around?
We've used seismic sensors to detect oncoming vehicles and things. There is certain conditions where that may be applicable, but I think Steve mentioned it in his opening talk that you have rollers, you have flails, they exist, everybody knows what they are. They can put heavy A lot of weight on the ground can set off mines. A lot of the chains hitting the ground can set off mines. But if you're not clearing 100% of the threat, you still have to bring a team in behind it. You still have to bring machines in. You still have to bring detectors in. Let's say you set off 10 of 100. You still got 90 of 100. And the process that you would have had to have clear that 100, you would still have to put in place. So that's one of the reasons. I'm sorry?
Therefore, don't try it.
No, I'm not saying don't try it. I'm saying we've tried. My point to you is we've tried mechanical devices, flails, and rollers that work. But if they don't work, if they only work 50 to 60% of the time, you still have that cost of employing that device or that methodology, and then you still have to follow it up with the same thing you did, and it maybe over time increases cost.
Okay, we got 3 questions lined up. We're going to do 1 here. Why don't we do the questions in a row, and then we'll do the answers in a row. So 1 here, please. 2 in the back, sir, with the yellow tie. 3 here with the yellow tie, please. Wait for the microphone, please.
Thanks. Kim Dozier, Daily Beast and CNN. Is there anything, Mr. Burke, that you heard from Mr. Hassani's presentation that you could roll out? And what do you think of the idea of this self-op, crowdsourcing idea to spread demining technology to a much wider audience and empower them?
Great,
yes.
Thank you. So we'll to do the questions first and then come back to that. Sir in the back.
Thank you. This is for Sean, I suppose. The University of Wisconsin developed and patented a technology that can detect the explosives inside of landmines and IEDs using drones. So my question to you is, how do we get this technology in front of you?
Thank you very much. And then, sir.
And then my question is for Steve and Sean. You mentioned the technical difficulties in detecting explosives, IEDs, mines in destroyed infrastructure. Have you looked at combining traditional methods with new technologies such as dogs? I am aware that the Marshall Legacy Institute has had fairly good success in detecting and then sending in a team to defuse it and rid of it. Have you looked into combining these two?
Is that dogs? You said,
Dogs,
sir?
yeah,
Dogs.
dogs.
Great. Okay, so sort of a general theme here. What kind of innovations have we been looking at? Things like the company that Masood has, drone technology, and then
Masood has?
merging traditional technologies with new ones. Sean, do you want to start?
Okay, so I'll try to hit the first 2 questions because he has developed some drone technology. The first thing I want to do is thank you. Passion is a hard thing in this job, and you can definitely see he has it. Experience is another thing, and I think as he gains experience, his innovations will get more focused because I think he's got a lot of good ideas, and I think if he talks with the right people that have the experience in the innovations of developing these technologies, and we'll be happy to speak to you as well, I think he'll be a great asset in the future to develop even more technologies that can be used. As far as the drones, which he's worked with too, we've worked with drones as well. The Army has spent millions of dollars developing aerial technologies. The problem with drones is they have a specific payload. That payload is not great, and the flying time is not great. So you have, as improvements in those types of things continue, I will certainly look up the University of Wisconsin and see the advances that they've made. We deal with a lot of universities, Carnegie Mellon, with robotics and so forth. So I don't want to comment on specifically on what they're doing, but I can just tell you the limitations that drones have. And the stability of drones carrying a sensor. There's a thing called synthetic aperture radar that many people have flirted with, which flies a radar over areas, and in certain conditions they work extremely well, and in certain conditions, especially if you introduce vegetation to the equation, it becomes extremely difficult. So I hope I answered your question, and I'll be happy to talk to you more offline on that.
Merging old technologies with new ones. Anybody want to?
Well, I'll leave the dogs to you because we as R&D, we don't do dogs. But
A lot of people talk about a toolbox approach, in that depending on the operational environment, depending on the threat, depending on the specific type of munition, there's probably going to be a different solution or different options. So as an example with dogs, they've been widely used, I think, since just after the Second World War to detect mines through smell, and they're used on checkpoints as explosive detection dogs. So they're good in certain circumstances. If you have if you imagine Mosul, certain areas of Mosul where it's been bombed, where there's IEDs, the amount of scent for the dog is just overwhelming. Their noses are so sensitive, they actually get confused. So you can use them in certain circumstances, and we do. You know, if there's dispersed mines or IEDs, they're ideal in that solution. Other contexts, not so good. So I think through organisations like Sean's, there's other ones, there's a a Swiss-funded centre in Geneva that shares technology and approaches. People do coordinate, people do cross-pollinate approaches, whether that's modifying existing commercially available equipment or specific things that are developed. And what we find is one approach isn't going to be the ultimate solution. There's no silver bullet. Just to go back to the seismic question, we do actually clear areas where there is mine and UXO contamination for oil companies to do seismic exploration. There's a lot of places that have a background UXO or mine problem. They require lanes clearing for the machines that you were talking about. They don't generally sympathetically detonate other munitions. That's not, I'm not a specialist in seismology. That's not to say there isn't maybe potential, but certainly people do use those machines in a contaminated environment, and there aren't sympathetic detonations of munitions nearby.
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up with that real quick, and Steve hit a great point, the silver bullet point. Almost in all cases, every technology developed, and I say almost all, about 80% if I had to guess, are niche technologies. That means that they are technologies designed to work in a specific environment against specific threats, and then when you move on to the next environment, you have to make subtle modifications or you even bring new equipment. The same with the dogs. The dogs work, I've heard from my experiences, they work extremely well in many environments, and in some cases they're problematic. They are living animals, so they have their own logistical issues. But again, the silver bullet approach, we call it a toolbox approach, that every technology falls in. You need a variety of different tools to solve a problem, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Paul, last point.
Yeah, I could not leave the stage without just saying this, because I think by the implication of a question earlier on this panel too, was that this administration is declining assistance on humanitarian operations. Well, in IED clearance and landmines, this administration has actually increased funds through WRA at historic levels by huge amounts. So there's a report called To Walk the Earth in Safety. We actually write up the report. Heather, if you could raise your hand. I think she brought some extra copies. That shows every U.S. taxpayer dollar going to what country and what organizations in those countries are receiving that funds, and it's at an all-time high. So maybe in some other areas of humanitarian stuff, but in this neighborhood, in this community, in this room, this administration has increased.
And my DoD funding's going up as well.
Yeah, thanks for those points. Sorry to those of you who still have questions, but I need to keep the trains on time. So with that, let's please thank our panel for their time today. And thank you all.